If you believe that the most satisfying victories are the ones no one sees you preparing for, and that sometimes the only way to reclaim your peace is to let the truth burn everything to the ground, then you're in the right place. Do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe and settle in. Because the quietest people often have the most devastating stories to tell. For 5 years, my mother-in-law built her kingdom on a throne of judgment. She was the matriarch, the moral compass, the unwavering pillar of propriety. But she made one fatal mistake. She taught me, day in and day out, that appearances are everything, so I decided to show our entire family what was really hiding behind hers. The first time I met Evelyn, David's mother, she didn't shake my hand. She took it, turned it over, and examined my nails. Unpolished, she'd murmured, her voice as crisp and cold as a winter morning. Practical, I suppose. David always did have a taste for this practical. She dropped my hand as if it were a soiled napkin. That was it. That was my welcome into the family. In that single, chilling moment, I wasn't a person. I was a specimen, a project, a disappointment she hadn't even had the time to properly cultivate yet. We had been married for 5 years, David and I. 5 years of building a life, a home, having our son Leo. And for every one of those 1,825 days, Evelyn was a shadow that fell over everything. She wasn't overly cruel in a way you could easily call out. No, her methods were far more insidious. Hers was the art of the slow-drip poison, the subtle undermining, the public compliment that was actually a veiled insult. She was a master of making me feel small while convincing everyone else she was simply trying to elevate me. Her world was a stage, and every family gathering was a new performance. Her house in the suburbs wasn't just a home, it was a museum of perceived perfection. The mahogany was always polished to a mirror shine, the carpets vacuumed in perfectly straight lines, and the air smelled faintly of lemon and condescension. We would gather for Sunday dinners, a weekly ritual that felt more like a tribunal. I was always the one on trial. I remember one dinner vividly. I'd spent all afternoon making a lemon and herb roast chicken, a dish David and Leo adored. I was proud of it. The skin was crispy, the meat was juicy, and the aroma filled our own small kitchen with warmth. I brought it to her house, setting it on the pristine white tablecloth of her dining room table. Evelyn circled the table, her eyes scanning every dish like a hawk. She picked up a serving spoon, prodded the chicken, and then looked at me, a tiny, pitying smile playing on her lips. "Oh, Jessica dear," she said, her voice loud enough for David's father, Richard, and his aunt and uncle to hear. How rustic! The word hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Rustic. It wasn't a compliment. In her vocabulary, it meant unrefined, common, not up to her standards. "I thought I'd try something new," I said, my voice betraying a slight tremor. "Of course you did," she replied, patting my arm in a gesture that was meant to look motherly but felt like a branding iron. "But you must remember, David was raised on proper French cuisine. Coq au vin, boeuf bourguignon. These simple, plain dishes, they can feel a bit jarring to a developed palate. David, bless his conflict-avoidant heart, just gave a weak laugh. Mom, it smells great. But the damage was done. The entire table now saw my offering not as a home-cooked meal made with love, but as a culinary failure. Throughout the dinner, I could feel the weight of her judgment. She'd watch me cut my food, watch how I sipped my wine, watch how I interacted with my own son. Later, as I was helping Leo cut his chicken, she leaned over and whispered, "You shouldn't coddle him so. A boy of 7 should be able to handle his own cutlery with precision. You're making him soft." I felt a hot flush of anger crawl up my neck. I looked at David, hoping for support, for him to just once say, "Mom, that's enough." But he was engrossed in a conversation with his father, expertly avoiding the battlefield. He called it keeping the peace. I called it leaving me to die on the hill alone. This was the rhythm of my life. My clothes were too modern if I wore jeans, and trying too hard if I wore a dress. My decision to work part-time as a graphic designer was a sign that I was neglecting my domestic duties. The way I decorated our home was a bit trendy, which from her was the highest form of insult, implying a lack of timeless class. But the most painful barbs were always reserved for my parenting. According to Evelyn, I was failing Leo at every turn. I was too lenient, too strict. I let him have too much screen time. I didn't push him hard enough academically. She saw herself as the guardian of the family's reputation, a reputation she believed I was single-handedly tarnishing with my every modern, imperfect human decision. Her mantra, repeated so often it was etched into the back of my mind, was, "A woman's duty is to her family's honor. Appearances, Jessica, they are the bedrock of a good name." Feelings were an inconvenience. Authenticity was a liability that I endured it. For David, for Leo, who deserved to have a grandmother, I learned to smile through the criticism, to let the comments wash over me. I would come home from these dinners feeling hollowed out, as if she had scooped out pieces of me with a silver spoon. I'd stand in the shower and let the hot water run over my face, washing away the forced smiles and the unshed tears. David would try to comfort me in his own clumsy way. "That's just how she is, Jess. She means well. She just has high standards. High standards for me, David." I'd say, my voice raw. "Never for herself, never for you. Just me." He would sigh, the weary sigh of a man caught between two worlds. "Just try to ignore it. For me." So I did. I ignored it. But as I watched her more closely, I started to notice things. Tiny cracks in the perfect porcelain facade. It started with her phone. She, a woman who decried technology as impersonal, was suddenly glued to it, tapping away at the screen with a small, secret smile. When she noticed me looking, she'd snap it shut and say she was coordinating a fundraiser for the church. Then there were the disappearances. On a Saturday afternoon, during a family barbecue, she announced she had to leave for a last-minute charity board meeting. She was gone for almost 4 hours. When she returned, her hair was slightly different, softer, and the scent of her usual lavender perfume was gone, replaced by something warmer, muskier, something I'd never smelled on her before. She seemed flustered when I mentioned it. "Oh, one of the other ladies must have been wearing a strong scent," she'd said dismissively. Another time, she showed up for Leo's school play, wearing a silk scarf I'd never seen before, a vibrant splash of color against her usually muted, beige and navy wardrobe. It was beautiful, expensive. "A gift from your father," she claimed when I complimented it. But I had been with David when he and his father bought her a birthday gift just last week, a set of gardening tools. Richard, her husband, looked at the scarf with a blank expression, as if seeing it for the first time. These were just whispers, dissonant notes in a carefully composed symphony of perfection. They were nothing. Coincidences. My mind, I told myself, was just trying to find flaws in a woman I disliked, trying to invent a weakness to make myself feel better. I was being petty, uncharitable. I was becoming the person she accused me of being. So I pushed the thoughts down. I smiled. I endured. I played my part as the dutiful, slightly less than perfect daughter-in-law. I convinced myself that this was just my life now, a constant, low-grade humiliation I had to accept. I was trapped in this gilded cage of family expectations, and Evelyn held the key. I was powerless, and the worst part was I was starting to believe it myself. I didn't know it yet, but my jailer, in her supreme arrogance, was about to get careless. She was about to leave the key right where I could find it. The months that followed were a masterclass in psychological attrition. Evelyn, perhaps sensing she had beaten me into a state of quiet submission, seemed to escalate her campaign. It was as if my silence emboldened her, making her critiques sharper, more public and more frequent. The weight of it all began to press down on me, not just during family dinners, but in my everyday life. I found myself second-guessing every decision. Would Evelyn approve of this brand of organic milk? Would she think this new picture book for Leo was too frivolous? Her voice became a permanent resident in my head, a relentless, judgmental narrator. My nights grew restless. I would lie awake long after David was asleep, replaying conversations in my mind, thinking of all the things I should have said. My heart would pound with a dull, anxious rhythm, a constant reminder of my powerlessness. I felt a creeping sense of isolation. My friends couldn't fully understand the nuance of Evelyn's cruelty. "She sounds like a typical mother-in-law," they'd say with a sympathetic shrug. But it wasn't typical. It was targeted. It was relentless. And it was working. I decided to try, one last time, to handle it head-on. Not with anger, but with vulnerability. I caught Evelyn alone in her kitchen one Sunday while the others were watching football in the living room. The room was sterile, all white countertops and stainless steel. "Evelyn," I began, my voice softer than I intended. "Can we talk for a moment?" She turned from the sink, wiping her hands on a perfectly folded tea towel. "Of course, Jessica. Is something wrong? Leo seems a bit pale today. I hope you're making sure he gets enough iron." My resolve wavered. She hadn't even let me speak before landing her first punch. I took a deep breath. "It's about us. Sometimes, the things you say, they're very hurtful. I feel like I can't do anything right in your eyes, and it's starting to affect me. It's affecting our family." I watched her face for any sign of understanding, of empathy. I found none. Instead, her expression hardened into one of profound disappointment, as if I'd just revealed a deeply pathetic character flaw. "Hurtful," she repeated, the word tasting like poison in her mouth. "Jessica, I am trying to help you. I am trying to uphold the standards that this family lives by. Marriage, motherhood, these are not about your feelings. They are about duty, about sacrifice. I had hoped you were strong enough to understand that. It seems I overestimated you." She turned her back to me, dismissing me completely. "You are being far too sensitive. Perhaps if you focused more on your responsibilities and less on your emotions, you wouldn't have time for such self-pity." I stood there, frozen, the chill from the marble floor seeping into my bones. She had done it again. She had taken my genuine pain and twisted it into a weapon against me, reframing it as a personal failing. I hadn't just been dismissed. I'd been diagnosed as weak and self-pitying. I walked out of that kitchen with a terrifying clarity. There would be no reasoning with her. There would be no truce. She didn't want a relationship with me. She wanted a subject to rule over. That failed confrontation was a turning point. My desperation began to curdle into a cold, hard knot of resentment. I stopped trying to win her approval and started, almost unconsciously, to simply observe her. I became a student of Evelyn. I watched her the way an ecologist watches a predator in its natural habitat, with detached, analytical curiosity. And the inconsistencies I'd noticed before, they became more glaring. The church committee meetings started happening on Friday evenings. She would leave the house in her usual conservative skirt suit and return hours later, looking energized, almost glowing, with a faint flush on her cheeks she'd attribute to a heated debate over the bake sale budget. Her husband, Richard, seemed oblivious. He was a kind, gentle man who adored his wife. He was a retired accountant, a creature of habit and quiet contentment. He saw Evelyn as the sun around which his entire world orbited. He would watch her with such open admiration, bragging to anyone who would listen about her tireless charity work and her unwavering moral fortitude. "She's the rock of this family," he'd often say, his eyes misty with pride. Watching him, so blissfully unaware, added another layer of sickness to the whole affair. He was a good man who deserved better than to be a prop in his wife's grand performance. The real shift happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. It was one of those miserable, dreary days. Leo had a big math project, and our internet at home was on the fritz. To escape the frustration, I took him to a cozy little cafe near the university, one of those places with mismatched armchairs and the rich, comforting smell of coffee beans and old books. We found a quiet corner, and I sat with him, patiently explaining long division while he scribbled away in his notebook. The bell above the door chimed, and I glanced up, my mind still on fractions and remainders. And then my entire world stopped. It was Evelyn. She walked in, shaking the rain from a chic black umbrella, one I'd never seen before. But it wasn't just the umbrella that was different. She was wearing a tailored trench coat, cinched at the waist, and underneath I could see a dark red dress that was far more stylish, more daring than anything in her usual wardrobe. Her hair, normally coiffed into a rigid helmet, was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked 10 years younger. She looked happy, but she wasn't alone. A man was with her. He was tall, with distinguished silver hair and a tweed jacket with leather elbow patches, looking every bit the university professor. He put his hand on the small of her back, guiding her toward a secluded table in the back. And Evelyn, she leaned into his touch. She leaned into it with a familiarity that spoke of countless similar moments. I felt the blood drain from my face. My breath hitched in my throat. Leo, oblivious, asked me a question about his homework, but his voice sounded like it was coming from a great distance. I was completely frozen, my eyes locked on the couple across the room. They sat down, their knees touching under the small table. He reached across and took her hand. She laughed, a sound I had never heard before. It wasn't her usual tight, controlled chuckle. This was a genuine, throaty laugh, full of a joy and freedom I never knew she possessed. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, wild drumbeat. This isn't happening, I thought. I'm imagining this. But then, the man leaned forward, his expression soft and intimate. He said something that made her smile, and he kissed her. It wasn't a chaste peck on the cheek. It was a real kiss, lingering and tender. And Evelyn didn't pull away. She closed her eyes, tilting her head slightly, and for a moment, the mask of the formidable, moral matriarch completely dissolved. In her place was a woman I didn't know at all. My hand, trembling, reached for my phone on the table. My movements felt slow, robotic, as if I were moving through water. I fumbled to open the camera app, my fingers clumsy and numb. I angled the phone, pretending to be texting, my body shielding my actions from Leo. I zoomed in, my thumb shaking so badly the image blurred for a second. I held my breath, steadied my hand, and pressed the button. Click! The sound was imperceptible in the cafe's gentle hum, but to me, it was as loud as a gunshot. I had it. A single, grainy photo. Evelyn, the pillar of propriety, kissing a man who was not her husband. I quickly paid our bill, my hands shaking as I handed the cash to the barista. I rushed Leo out of the cafe, my mind a chaotic whirlwind of shock, disgust, and a terrifying, burgeoning sense of power. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat on the couch in the dark, the blue light of my phone illuminating my face as I stared at the photo. It was proof, not just of an affair, but of a staggering hypocrisy that dwarfed every single criticism she had ever leveled at me. All her lectures about loyalty, honor, and a woman's duty, they were all a lie. A grand, elaborate performance to hide the truth of who she really was. It was a tiny, unraveling thread on an otherwise perfectly woven tapestry of deception. And as I sat there in the silence of my home, a cold, calm certainty settled over me. I was going to pull on that thread until the entire thing came apart. The photo on my phone felt like a dangerous secret, a live wire I was holding in my bare hands. For the first few days, I did nothing. I was paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of what I had discovered. A part of me, the part that had been conditioned to fear Evelyn and avoid conflict, screamed at me to delete it, to pretend I had never seen a thing. It would be easier, safer. But then, I would remember the sting of her words, the years of quiet humiliation, the way she made me feel like an intruder in my own family. I would think of Richard, of his kind, trusting eyes, and the fear would slowly recede, replaced by a cold, resolute anger. This wasn't just about getting back at her. It was about exposing a rot that had been poisoning our family from its very core. She had built her entire identity on a foundation of moral superiority, and that foundation was a lie. The truth deserved to come out. My mission began. I transformed from a passive victim into a silent, meticulous investigator. It was a role I never imagined for myself, but I slipped into it with a terrifying ease. My part-time graphic design work gave me flexible hours and a built-in excuse for being on my laptop at odd times. My mind, usually occupied with color palettes and client briefs, was now a whirring machine of strategy and observation. My first real break came 2 weeks later. It was a Sunday, another mandatory family gathering, this time a barbecue at Evelyn and Richard's. The air was thick with the smell of charcoal and Evelyn's suffocating pleasantries. She was in her element, directing everyone, critiquing the way Richard was grilling the burgers, and commenting that my potato salad was a little heavy on the mayonnaise. I just smiled. It was different this time. Her words didn't sting, they were just data points, further evidence of the hypocrisy I now knew to be true. At one point, Evelyn, flustered by a request from one of the aunts, thrust her laptop into my hands. "Jessica, be a dear and look up that recipe for a gluten-free pavlova for Susan. It's bookmarked under desserts." She was already turning away before I could answer. I took the laptop and sat down at the patio table, my heart starting to beat a little faster. As I opened the browser, I saw that her email tab was still open. My breath caught. I quickly navigated to her bookmarks, my hands feeling slick with sweat. But then, a notification banner slid down from the top right corner of the screen. It was a new email. The sender was Alistair F. The subject line read, "Tonight." My blood ran cold. I glanced over my shoulder. Evelyn was deep in conversation across the lawn. I had seconds. With a trembling finger, I clicked on the email tab. My eyes scanned the message, absorbing the words in a frantic rush. "My dearesty, I can't stop thinking about our last meeting. Counting the hours until I can see you tonight. The usual place, 8 p.m.? I've booked the room. Wear the red dress. Yours, A. Alistair F. E. The red dress. The usual place." It was him, the man from the cafe. My mind raced. I needed to save this. Deleting it would alert him. Printing it was impossible. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking so violently I could barely operate it. I took a quick, clear photograph of the screen, capturing the sender, the message, the date, and the time. Then, with a final click, I navigated to the pavlova recipe, closed the email tab, and cleared the browser history. The entire operation took less than 20 seconds. When I brought the laptop back to her, my face was a placid mask, but inside I was electric. "Found it," I said, my voice unnervously steady. She took the computer without even a glance at me. She had no idea she had just handed me the second brick in the wall of her downfall. The evidence started to accumulate, sometimes through sheer luck, sometimes through calculated risk. One afternoon, while helping her bring groceries in from her car, her handbag tipped over, spilling its contents onto the driveway. As we both knelt to pick things up, I saw it, a folded receipt from a place called the Willow Creek Inn, a discreet, upscale boutique hotel on the other side of town. The date on it matched a Friday night 2 weeks ago when she'd supposedly been at an all-night church vigil. While her back was turned, I palmed the receipt and slipped it into my pocket. It felt like stealing, but I justified it as recovering stolen truths. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that would become the centerpiece of my plan, was obtained through a moment of pure technological happenstance. David and I had borrowed Evelyn's car to pick up a large item from a furniture store. As I got into the passenger seat, her phone, which she'd left in the center console, automatically connected to the car's Bluetooth system. A moment later, a call came through from Alistair Finch. My heart leaped into my throat. David, focused on pulling out of the driveway, just glanced at the screen. "Mom's getting a call," he said, and hit the ignore button on the steering wheel. A few seconds later, a notification popped up on the car's dashboard screen. New voicemail from Alistair Finch. My mind was screaming. That voicemail was everything. When we got back to her house, Evelyn was distracted, helping Richard in the garden. She asked us to just leave her phone in the car and that she'd get it later. David ran inside to use the restroom. I was alone. I stood by the car, my conscience waging a furious war. This was a massive invasion of privacy. This was a line I'd never thought I'd cross. But then I heard her voice in my head, lecturing me on morality, on honor. The hypocrisy was so staggering, it felt like an offense that voided all rights to privacy. I opened the car door, my hands slick. I picked up her phone. Her passcode, I knew from watching her over the years, was Leo's birthday. My fingers trembled as I typed it in. It worked. I navigated to her voicemail, my ears straining for any sound of someone approaching. I found the new message from Alistair. I didn't listen to it through the phone speaker. Instead, I saw an option I hadn't expected: voicemail transcription. With a tap, the message appeared as text on the screen. It was short, but it was devastating. "Evelyn, my love, just calling to hear your voice. I'm still reeling from last night. You are magnificent. I'll call you on the private line later. I miss you, darling. My love. Darling. Magnificent." These were words of deep intimacy, of a long-standing affair. This wasn't a fling. This was a separate life. Using my own phone, I recorded a video of myself scrolling through the voicemail and its transcription, making sure her phone's screen, the date, and the caller ID were all clearly visible. Then I deleted the voicemail. I knew Alistair would likely call back on the private line, so Evelyn would never know the message had even been left on this phone. I put the phone back, closed the car door, and walked away, my heart feeling like a cold, heavy stone in my chest that I now had everything. A photo of them kissing, an email confirming a tryst, a hotel receipt, and a voicemail transcription that was undeniably intimate. I uploaded everything to a secure, password-protected folder on my computer. I labeled it the truth. The only question left was when and how to deploy it. A quiet conversation with Richard? An anonymous letter? No, that was too small, too contained. Her crimes weren't private whispers. They were public pronouncements. Her stage was the family. Her audience was all of us. The humiliation she had inflicted on me was always in front of others that our downfall, I decided, needed to be just as public. It needed to happen on her stage, in front of her audience. And I knew the perfect occasion was coming up. David's 35th birthday party. The entire family would be there. It was an event Evelyn was planning herself, an opportunity for her to showcase her perfection as a hostess and a matriarch. She would be at the peak of her power, surrounded by the people whose respect she craved. It was perfect. I spent the next week planning not an attack, but a presentation. I wasn't going to scream or cry. I wasn't going to stoop to her level. I would be calm, factual, and unwavering. I would simply present the truth and let it do the work. I felt a strange sense of calm descend over me. The anxiety that had plagued me for years was gone, replaced by the quiet confidence of someone who held an unassailable position. I was no longer a victim. I was the architect of a reckoning. The stage was set. The audience was about to arrive. And the star of the show had no idea she was about to give the performance of a lifetime. The day of David's birthday party arrived, painted in the deceptively cheerful hues of a perfect late summer evening. Evelyn had, of course, outdone herself. Her backyard was transformed into an elegant oasis, with fairy lights twinkling in the trees, crisp white linens on the tables, and the gentle sound of classical music floating through the air. Dozens of family members and close friends were there, aunts, uncles, cousins, David's childhood friends. It was a full house, a captive audience. I moved through the party with a serene, almost detached calm. I wore a simple blue dress, something Evelyn would normally deem uninspired. But tonight, I felt invincible in it. I smiled, I made small talk, I accepted compliments on how well-behaved Leo was. On the surface, I was the perfect daughter-in-law. Inside, my heart beat a slow, steady, deliberate rhythm, like a clock ticking down to a momentous event. David was happy, circulating among his friends, laughing and relaxed. He was oblivious, and a part of me felt a pang of guilt for what I was about to do to his family, to his mother. But this wasn't just about my pain. It was about the lie at the center of his entire life. He deserved to know who his mother truly was. Richard, dear Richard, was beaming. He followed Evelyn around with a plate of hors d'oeuvres, his face alight with pride. "Isn't she amazing?" he asked me at one point, gesturing to the perfectly arranged garden. "She thinks of everything." I just nodded, my smile feeling tight. "She certainly does," I said. The moment came, as I knew it would, after the cake had been cut and the presents had been opened. Evelyn, holding a glass of champagne, clinked a fork against it to get everyone's attention. The chatter died down. This was her moment, the matriarch's address. "If I could have everyone's attention for a moment," she began, her voice resonating with practiced authority. She gave a beautiful, heartfelt speech about David, about what a wonderful son he was, how proud she was of the man he had become. And then, her gaze shifted and found me. The temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. "A man is only as strong as the woman by his side," she continued, her eyes locked on mine. The crowd murmured in agreement. And in this modern age, it is more important than ever to remember the timeless values that hold a family together. Values like loyalty, honor, respectability. She took a deliberate step closer to where I was standing beside David. It is a woman's sacred duty to be the moral bedrock of her home, to set an example of integrity and grace. It requires sacrifice. It requires putting the family's reputation above one's own fleeting feelings. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Some of us understand this instinctively. We set the example. While others, she let the sentence hang, her sharp, disdainful glance at me finishing it for her. The implication was clear to everyone who knew our dynamic. She was publicly shaming me, framing me as a failure, a modern woman who lacked the character to be a proper wife. I felt David shift uncomfortably beside me. I could see the pity in the eyes of some of his aunts. The humiliation was thick, palpable. It was her checkmate, but she didn't know the game had changed. I let the silence settle for a moment. Then, I took a calm, deliberate breath. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show a flicker of anger. I simply stood up a little straighter and met her gaze. "You're absolutely right, Evelyn," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying across the silent yard. A few people looked surprised that I was speaking up. Evelyn herself looked momentarily taken aback. Loyalty and honesty are the most important values a family can have, which is why I think everyone here, especially Richard and David, deserves to know the truth about yours. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's condescending smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then alarm. David looked at me, his eyes wide with a silent plea, "Jess, don't." I ignored him. I slowly reached into my purse and took out my phone. My hands were perfectly calm. I placed it on the table in front of me. "What is the meaning of this, Jessica?" Evelyn snapped, her voice losing its polished edge. "It's a voicemail, Evelyn," I said softly. "I think you should hear it." I tapped the screen. And then, her lover's voice filled the stunned silence of the backyard. It wasn't loud, but it was crystal clear in the evening air. "Evelyn, my love, I'm still reeling from last night. You are magnificent. I miss you, darling." The world seemed to stop. Every single eye in that yard swiveled from the phone to Evelyn. Her face, just moments ago flushed with self-righteous pride, had gone a ghastly, mottled white. Richard stared at her, his jaw slack, his face a canvas of pure, uncomprehending disbelief. David looked like he'd been physically struck, his eyes darting between me and his mother. That's a fake," Evelyn stammered, her voice a shrill, desperate thing. "A fabrication. Jessica is a spiteful, vindictive liar. She's always been jealous of me." I didn't argue. I didn't say a word. I simply swiped the screen of my phone and held it up. The first image appeared, the email from Alistair Finch. "The usual place. 8 p.m.? I've booked the room. Wear the red dress." I saw David's Aunt Clara gasp. She had complimented Evelyn on a new red dress just an hour earlier. "That means nothing," Evelyn shrieked, her composure completely shattered. "It's out of context." I swiped again. The receipt from the Willow Creek Inn, with its incriminating date and time, filled the screen. And then, the final, undeniable proof. I swiped one last time to the photo from the cafe. Evelyn, her face soft and joyous, being kissed by the handsome, silver-haired professor. The crowd erupted in gasped whispers. It was undeniable. The timeline, the words, the photo, they all wove together into an inescapable tapestry of her deceit. No one was looking at me anymore. All eyes were on the woman who had appointed herself their moral judge. Richard made a small, wounded sound, like an animal in pain. He slowly sank into a chair, his face ashen, his eyes fixed on his wife with a look of utter devastation. The pride he had worn all night was gone, replaced by a profound and public heartbreak. Evelyn stood frozen, exposed under the gentle glow of the fairy lights she had so carefully hung. Her mask of perfection was not just cracked, it had been ground into dust at her feet. She opened her mouth, then closed it. There were no words, no excuses, no lectures that could save her. For the first time in the 5 years I had known her, Evelyn had absolutely nothing to say. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I simply picked up my phone, slipped it back into my purse, and looked at her, my expression not of triumph, but of finality. "I don't need to win arguments, Evelyn," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "The truth speaks for itself." I turned, took Leo's hand, and walked away, leaving the wreckage of her beautifully curated world behind me. I didn't look back. The gentle classical music was still playing, a bizarre, surreal soundtrack to the complete and utter implosion of a life built on lies. As we walked toward the car, I felt the heavy, suffocating weight that I had carried for 5 long years begin to lift from my shoulders. It felt like breathing for the first time. The party, of course, dissolved in minutes. People fled as if escaping a house on fire, their hushed, scandalized whispers trailing behind them. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic, just as I knew it would be. Richard filed for divorce the following week. He never spoke to Evelyn again. The man who had adored her, who had seen her as his rock, was shattered by the depth of her betrayal. David was forced to confront a reality he had spent his whole life avoiding. His mother was not the saint she pretended to be. Our marriage went through a difficult period of healing, but for the first time, it was built on a foundation of honesty. He finally understood the years of torment I had endured, and he apologized, truly and deeply, for his years of passive complicity. Evelyn became a pariah. The family and friends who had once revered her now saw her only with pity and contempt. Her social standing, the bedrock of her entire existence, crumbled into nothing. She had spent a lifetime judging others on their appearances, and now her own true appearance had been revealed to all. She was no longer a matriarch. She was just a lonely woman in a large, empty house, with nothing but the ghosts of her own lies for company. I never set out to destroy her. I only set out to find the truth. The destruction was simply a consequence of the life she had chosen to live. I found my peace, not in her suffering, but in my own freedom. Freedom from her judgment, freedom from the constant feeling of being less than, and freedom from a lie that had held our entire family captive. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't a loud, angry battle, but the quiet, undeniable arrival of the truth. Thank you for listening to this story. If you've ever felt underestimated or judged, and believe in the power of truth to set things right, I'd be so grateful if you'd leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice and long-awaited revenge. Until next time, remember, the quietest people are often the ones you should watch the most.